Final week of the season. It is the Thursday Thanksgiving edition of the Friday Forecast.
Happy Thanksgiving,
Happy
Mr.
Thanksgiving
Kendeigh.
to you. I hope you have a good one as you get ready for the Iowa Hawkeyes and Nebraska Cornhuskers. Let's first talk about the Nebraska Cornhuskers last week. More about the first half, or do you take away more about the second half comeback?
I think you have to look at the first half. I mean, 5 straight 3-and-outs to end the first half, followed by 1 to start the third quarter. That was really the meat of the game. When you literally get outgained in the fashion Nebraska got outgained on that 5-possession period, particularly, I think 35 points in a row Penn State scored when Nebraska had those 3-and-outs, and I mean, that was the game. And Penn State pulled back a little. Barkley and McSorley got their numbers. They came out of that game. And Nebraska did some damage. They executed. Tanner Lee made some unbelievable throws, but let's be real about the situation and what it was. But it was good to see at least Nebraska competed there towards the end.
Before we get into the Mike Riley situation, let's talk about last year's Iowa game. I know there was a big point of emphasis on the Monday press conference. What did you think about last year's Iowa game and that being kind of a turning point, fork in the road for this program?
I really think it was because, the Ohio State game, you can say that was
last year.
But when you think about that, Nebraska bounced back and won 2 in a row. They held Minnesota and Maryland to statistically 2 of their worst offensive games of the season. So you're like, all right, this team has kind of found itself back. They're 9-2. And then, Armstrong's injury and then Riker Fife's injury at the same time, and the management of that on top of just that game, it just derailed everything. I mean, you think about the difference between 9-2 or 10-2 versus 9-3, and Nebraska was sniffing a 10-2 regular season, which they would have been on track to have their best year since the 03 season. And then not only do you lose, you get blown out. You fire your D coordinator, you fire your special teams coach, you basically run out your secondary coach, bring in another guy, and so all this stuff happened. In Iowa, you could argue, and Mark Banker's bloodbath comments were the start of all that.
Mm-hmm. Do you think, this was brought up quite a bit Monday, do you think this is a rivalry? It seemed like some of the players really forced themselves to convince themselves that it may be a bigger game than normal, but I don't get the sense that they truly believe that.
I think it is still, though, becoming that, and why? Because Iowa, it started really with Sean Eichhorst. Mm-hmm. When Sean Eichhorst fired Bo Pelini and said he did not look at the Iowa win that day into this decision to fire Pelini because he looked at the state of where Iowa's program was. Mm-hmm. I mean, that is almost what started this rivalry, I feel. That moment where Eichhorst called them out and said, you're nothing, and beating you didn't have anything to do with us firing Bo Pelini, or, had nothing to do with the discussion about it at all, win or lose. And that is what upset Kirk Ferentz, Brian Ferentz, the Iowa fan base, and they've almost kind of come to life since that day. That's when they followed it up with the undefeated season, and last year destroying Nebraska. So it's really interesting to see kind of how this thing has turned when Eichhorst made those comments that day.
Yeah, Mike Riley 0-2 against the Hawkeyes. The Hawkeyes, though, after beating Ohio State in that incredible upset, they've dropped 2 in a row. They've lost to Wisconsin, and then last week, kind of a puzzler against Purdue. What do you expect from the Hawkeyes this weekend?
I mean, they're going to be ready to go. They get up for this game, and they're a physical team. They're going to try to run the ball with Akram Wadley. We know their tight end Noah Fan is going to give Nebraska problems over the middle, but really it's an even matchup in a lot of respects. Both of these teams have played. I think of their last 12 games, they've only won 4. So they're 4-8 combined over the last 12. So neither team is playing their best football here down the stretch of the season, and both fan bases are pretty upset about the year. If you kind of gauge the Iowa fans right now, I mean they're 6-5 when it looked like they were a sure thing to maybe be 8-4, even 9-3. I mean you could argue that they could have won out here down the stretch. So a very disappointing season here for Iowa as much as Nebraska.
Yeah, Iowa is bowl eligible. Nebraska is not. This very well be Mike Riley's last game as the Nebraska head coach. He did not want to talk big picture on Monday, but how do you think not only did he handle Monday, but how he handled this whole situation these last couple months?
Yeah, he's operated with first class. Just the way he's handled it and really not made it about him. It'd be so easy to do and so easy to pout and whine about Sean Eichhorst's firing and what it did to this season and bringing in a new AD and just all that stuff. But he does not go there. And man, no one can, I mean, it's not easy to do. It takes a big person to do that. So I think people have a lot of respect for Mike, and I envision Friday, Andy, being very emotional. Mm-hmm. And let's just say this: if Nebraska comes out and wins this game, there will be people that will I think there'll be some tears in the stadium when he's walking off the field with his wife Dee waving, win or lose. I think it will be a very emotional moment in this stadium, and Nebraska fans will respect Mike Riley for how he conducted himself and realize that he didn't win enough games to keep his job probably, but I think we can all learn how to just conduct ourselves by the way Mike Riley did here the last 3 years.
Yeah, very classy act every step of the way. It's Nebraska and Iowa in the season finale, the game on Black Friday afternoon. It's on FS1.